This is the only woman I will kneel for.
The Alpha King's declaration shattered the coronation hall. Beside him stood the Omega his council had banned, alive, awake, and dressed in white. The woman they'd tried to murder. And she'd just walked into the ceremony meant to crown someone else. If you believe love is worth fighting for, subscribe to Silver Moon Chronicles. Don't let this story disappear. The hymn stopped the moment the iron doors exploded inward. It wasn't just that the hundreds of voices went silent. It was that the very candlelight seemed to flicker and dim. Every noble wolf in the coronation hall, every council elder, every pack alpha, every heir to ancient bloodlines, stopped breathing as he stepped into the sacred chamber. Krevnar Bloodbane, the Alpha King. His armor was drenched in melted snow. His crimson cloak hung in frozen, tattered strips. Fresh blood, human and wolf, stained his gauntlets. But no one looked at the mud splattered across his chest plate or the frost clinging to his dark hair. Every eye was locked on the small, trembling figure wrapped in his arms. When he walked past the altar where his arranged bride stood waiting, past the high council seated in their ceremonial robes, and stopped directly before Elder Varos, the king didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He whispered 5 words that shattered centuries of law. You tried to bury her alive. The coronation of the Alpha King was always an exercise in control. Held in the Grand Hall of Lyking, a cathedral carved from black stone and draped in banners bearing the crests of every major pack, it was where power was displayed, alliances were forged, and the hierarchy was reinforced with ritual and gold. Tonight was supposed to be perfect. Golden candlelight dripped from iron chandeliers, casting warm light over the sea of nobles dressed in their finest silks and furs. The air was thick with incense, cedarwood and sage, mingling with the underlying scent of dominance that rolled off every alpha in attendance. Ancient hymns echoed off vaulted ceilings, sung by robed priests who'd prepared for this moment for months. At the center of it all stood Lady Celoria of the Ruby Fangs. She was stunning in a gown of deep crimson, her silver hair braided with threads of gold, her posture regal and rehearsed. She'd been chosen by the High Council months ago, a political match designed to unite the northern territories and secure Krevnar's rule. She smiled serenely, one hand resting on the altar, the other clasped delicately at her waist. Behind her, seated in 2 rows of ornate chairs carved from ancient oak, sat the High Council. 12 of the oldest, most powerful wolves on the continent. Silver-haired. Cold-eyed. Draped in ceremonial robes embroidered with runes older than memory. Elder Varos sat at the center, his hands folded calmly in his lap, his thin lips curved into a satisfied smile. Everything was going according to plan. The hymn swelled. The priests raised their hands. Celoria lifted her chin, ready to receive her crown. That's when the doors exploded open. The sound was like a crack of thunder. The iron hinges groaned. The stained glass windows rattled in their frames. The hymns died mid-note. Conversations choked off. The absolute silence that followed was suffocating. Standing in the archway was a figure that made even the eldest council members flinch. Krevnar Bloodbane stood 6 feet 7 inches, shoulders broad enough to block out the moonlight streaming in from the corridor behind him. His armor, usually polished to a black mirror shine, was dented, scratched, and caked with mud. His crimson cloak, the symbol of his reign, hung in frozen strips from his shoulders. Blood stained his gauntlets. Frost clung to his long dark hair. But tonight, the king looked different. He wasn't projecting his aura to crush the room into submission, though the sheer power radiating off him made the candles flicker. He wasn't snarling or threatening. He was carrying something. Krevnar took a step forward. His boots thudded against the marble floor. Thud. 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 The crowd parted like a river split by stone. No one wanted to be within arm's reach of him. As he moved into the candlelight, the bundle in his arms became clear. It was a woman. She was tiny against his massive frame, her body limp, her head resting against his chest plate. Her white dress, once beautiful, now torn and mud-stained, spilled over his armored forearm like moonlight. Her legs were bruised, scraped raw. A deep gash on her temple had dried with blood. Her pale hand clutched his cloak weakly, even in unconsciousness. Her brown hair was matted with frost and dirt. Her lips were faintly blue. She looked half dead. Krevnar's face was a mask of cold, lethal fury. His amber eyes had bled completely black, his wolf at the surface, barely contained. He walked past the terrified nobles, his gaze locked on one target. Elder Varos. Celoria gasped softly, taking a step back from the altar. Her carefully rehearsed composure cracked. Beside her, the other council members exchanged panicked glances. Varos, to his credit, remained seated. His thin smile didn't falter, though his knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrests of his chair. Krevnar stopped 3 feet from the council's podium. The scent rolling off him, pine, snow, blood, and raw fury, overpowered the incense. "Your Majesty," Varos said smoothly, his voice echoing in the silent hall. "We were not expecting you until the ceremony began. Has there been an accident?" Krevnar didn't answer. He looked down at the woman in his arms, shifting her weight gently, as if she were made of porcelain. Then he looked back up at Varos. "Do you know who this is?" Krevnar asked, his voice low, a rumble that vibrated in the floorboards. Varos glanced at the woman, his eyes narrowing slightly. Recognition flickered, brief, but unmistakable. Then he schooled his expression into polite confusion. "I'm afraid I don't, Your Majesty." "Perhaps a villager caught in the storm?" "Liar." The word hung in the air like a blade. Varos's smile tightened. "Your Majesty, you're clearly distressed. Perhaps we should postpone the ceremony until—" "Her name," Krevnar interrupted, his voice rising, echoing off the vaulted ceiling, "is Mira." Gasps rippled through the hall. Nobles whispered frantically to one another. Even the other council members shifted uncomfortably. Celoria's face went pale. "The Omega," she whispered. "The Omega we exiled," Varos said quickly, standing now, his voice sharp with authority. "Yes. I remember her. She left of her own accord after you ordered her death," Krevnar snarled. The hall erupted. Shouts. Gasps. Wolves instinctively backing away from the confrontation. Varos raised his hands in mock innocence. "Your Majesty, that is an outrageous accusation. The girl left of her own accord. I found her 3 miles from the northern border," Krevnar said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Buried in snow. Claw marks around her. Wolfsbane in her veins." The hall went deathly silent. Wolfsbane. Illegal. Forbidden. A poison used only by assassins. Krevnar's eyes never left Varos. "She was attacked. Left to die. And when I knelt beside her, when I pulled her from the snow." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Your scent was everywhere." Varos's face hardened. "You're mistaken." "Am I?" Krevnar stepped closer, his massive frame towering over the elder. "Because before she lost consciousness, she whispered your name." The other council members exchanged horrified glances. Celoria covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Varos's eyes flashed with something dark. Rage. Fear. Desperation. "If she survives," Varos said coldly, "she is still not your concern, Your Majesty. She was an Omega." A nobody. A political liability. You agreed to this match, he gestured towards Celoria, for the good of the realm. Krevnar let out a low, dark laugh. He looked down at Mira, his expression softening into something agonizingly tender. He brushed a strand of frozen hair from her bruised forehead. Then he turned his back on the council and faced the entire hall. His voice rolled over the crowd like thunder. This is the only woman I will kneel for. The coronation hall exploded into chaos. Nobles shouted. Council members stood, robes billowing. Guards reached for their weapons, unsure who to protect. Celoria stumbled backward, her perfect composure shattered. But Krevnar didn't move. He stood in the center of the storm, holding Mira as if she were the only thing that mattered in the world. Elder Varos's face twisted with fury. You would throw away your throne for an Omega? For a girl with no pack, no name, no power? Krevnar's eyes burned gold. She's worth more than every corrupted soul in this hall. If you can't stand leaders who abuse their power and silence the innocent, hit subscribe. Only people like Elder Varos won't. Comment what time you're watching this if you believe love is stronger than corruption. The guards moved first. 20 armored wolves stepped forward, surrounding Krevnar with their blades drawn. But before anyone could strike, the king's eyes flashed pure molten gold. The temperature in the hall plummeted. Every guard froze mid-step, their instincts screaming at them not to challenge an alpha in this state. Stand down, Krevnar growled, his voice echoing with the weight of absolute command. They did. Elder Varos watched from his podium, jaw clenched, fury simmering beneath his ceremonial robes. He knew he'd lost this round. But wars weren't won in a single battle. Krevnar turned and walked toward the side entrance, Mira still cradled protectively against his chest. The crowd parted instantly, wolves pressing themselves against the walls to let him pass. As the king disappeared into the shadows of the corridor, one thought burned through every mind in that hall. How did it come to this? 6 months earlier. The village of Greyridge sat on the northernmost border of the kingdom, a forgotten place where the wind howled through the pines and snow fell 9 months out of the year. It was a place the capital ignored, a place where Omegas and low-ranking wolves scraped out a living far from the politics of the throne. Mira had lived there her entire life. She was a healer. Not the magical kind with ancestral bloodlines, or so everyone believed, but the practical kind. She knew which herbs stopped bleeding, which roots eased fever, and which teas calmed a frightened child. The villagers trusted her. Loved her, even. She lived in a small stone cottage at the edge of the forest, alone but never lonely. Until the day a stranger arrived carrying a dying pup. Krevnar had come to Greyridge in disguise, a simple traveler's cloak hiding his armor, his scent masked by pine resin. He'd been inspecting border conditions, checking on villages the council claimed were thriving. They weren't. He'd found the pup half frozen in a snowbank, abandoned by its pack. Too weak. Too small. Deemed unworthy. Krevnar had carried it for 3 miles to the nearest healer. When Mira opened her door and saw the massive man holding the trembling pup, she didn't hesitate. She pulled them both inside, set the stranger by her fire, and got to work. For hours, Krevnar watched her. The way her hands moved with quiet confidence. The way she whispered soft reassurances to the pup even when it couldn't hear her. The way her brown eyes focused with fierce determination on saving a life everyone else had discarded. And when the pup finally opened its eyes and let out a weak whimper, Mira smiled. It was the most beautiful thing Krevnar had ever seen. "Thank you," he said quietly. Mira looked up at him for the first time, really looked, and something shifted in the air between them. A pull. A recognition. Neither of them understood it yet. He came back. Night after night, under the cover of darkness, Krevnar returned to Greyridge. He told himself it was to check on the pup. To ensure the village had adequate resources. To fulfill his duty as king. But that was a lie. He came back for her. They met in secret, by the frozen river, in the shadow of the old watchtower, beneath the towering pines where moonlight barely reached. They talked for hours. About everything. About nothing. Mira made him laugh, something no one at court had managed in years. She challenged him, questioned him, saw past the crown to the man beneath. And Krevnar? He made her feel seen. Protected. Valued. One night, as they stood beneath the stars, Mira's emotions overwhelmed her. Tears streamed down her face as she confessed how lonely she'd been, how invisible she'd felt her entire life. That's when it happened. A spark of white light flickered at her fingertips. Then another. The air around her shimmered with energy neither of them recognized. Krevnar caught her hands gently, steadying her. What was that? I don't know, Mira whispered, fear flashing in her eyes. It's happened before, but only when I'm emotional. I thought I was broken. You're not broken, Krevnar said fiercely. You're extraordinary. But the council had eyes everywhere. Word reached them within weeks. The Alpha King was visiting in Omega. In secret. Repeatedly. Elder Varro summoned Krevnar to the capital immediately. The throne room was cold when Krevnar arrived. 12 council members sat in judgment, their expressions carved from stone. We know about the girl, Varro said without preamble. Krevnar's jaw tightened. Her name is Mira. We don't care what her name is, another elder snapped. The king does not mate beneath his station. Omegas cannot be Luna. She is a political liability. She is none of your concern, Krevnar growled. Varro leaned forward, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. Choose her, and you lose the throne. We will strip your title, disband your pack, and crown another. Is one Omega worth destroying everything your family built? The threat hung in the air like a blade. Krevnar said nothing. But his silence was answer enough. Mira had followed him. She'd sensed something was wrong, traveled to the capital in secret, and waited outside the throne room. She heard everything. Every word. Every threat. Every impossible choice. Her heart shattered. She couldn't let him lose his throne. Not for her. Not when she was nobody, just an Omega from a forgotten village with strange, terrifying power she didn't understand. So she ran. That night, in the dead of winter, Mira fled into the mountains. She left no note. No goodbye. She simply vanished into the snow, hoping distance would save the man she loved. What she didn't know was that Elder Varros had already made his move. Find her, Varros ordered 2 of his most loyal hunters that same night. Ensure the problem is resolved permanently. Krevnar searched for months. He abandoned palace life, ignored Soloria's carefully orchestrated visits, and spent every waking moment scouring the northern territories. His wolf grew weak with longing. His advisors begged him to return. He refused. Because somewhere in the frozen wilderness, Mira was alone. Hunted. And he would find her. Even if it killed him. 3 nights ago. The snowstorm was the worst in decades. Krevnar had followed a faint trail, barely a scent, just a whisper of her presence, through miles of blizzard. His armor was frozen solid. His cloak hung in icy strips. His hands were numb. But he didn't stop. And then he saw her. Half buried in a snowdrift, her white dress torn and blood-stained, claw marks gouged into the frozen ground around her. She wasn't moving. Krevnar dropped to his knees, pulling her from the snow with trembling hands. "Mira," he choked. "Mira, stay with me." Her eyes fluttered open, barely. Her lips were blue. Her pulse was fading. She looked at him with recognition and whispered one word before darkness claimed her. "Varos." If you can't stand people who manipulate and destroy innocent lives for power, subscribe now. Only the corrupt stay silent. Comment "Justice for Mira" if you believe everyone deserves protection from predators like Varos. Present day, the Coronation Hall. Krevnar stood in the center of the chaos, Mira's unconscious body cradled against his chest. The hall erupted around him, nobles shouting, guards uncertain whether to advance or retreat, council members rising from their seats with faces twisted in fury and panic. He turned slowly, his eyes scanning the crowd until they locked onto Elder Varos. "She was attacked," Krevnar announced, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Poisoned with wolfsbane. Left to die in the snow." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle over the hall. "And your scent, Varos, was everywhere." The accusations hit like thunder. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Nobles exchanged horrified glances. Even the other council members stepped away from Varos, creating distance from the accusation. Varos's face drained of color for a split second before he composed himself. He pressed a hand to his chest, eyes wide with manufactured shock. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice trembling with false emotion. "You are clearly confused. Emotional. The trauma of finding her in such a state has clouded your judgment." "I would never." "Liar," Krevnar snarled. "I am a loyal servant of this throne." Varos shot back, his voice rising. "You are misguided, my king. Distressed by what you've seen. But accusing a council elder of murder," Krevnar finished coldly. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Across the hall, Lady Celoria stood frozen at the altar, her hands trembling. Her perfect coronation, the moment she'd prepared for her entire life, was crumbling before her eyes. Humiliation burned in her chest, followed by anger, then cold political terror. She wasn't just losing a crown. She was losing everything. "Someone help her," a voice called from the crowd. 3 royal healers rushed forward, their robes billowing as they approached Krevnar. "Your Majesty, let us take her." "Stop." Varos screamed, his composure finally shattering. "Do not touch her." But it was too late. The head healer reached for Mira, his hands hovering over her bruised skin. The moment his fingers made contact, he recoiled with a scream of pain. His palms were burned. Not from heat. From light. A faint white gold glow radiated from Mira's skin, pulsing with each shallow breath she took. The light flickered and danced across her fingertips like living fire, illuminating the torn fabric of her dress. The hall went deathly silent. Every wolf in attendance recognized that glow. Not from memory, none of them were old enough. But from the ancient texts. From the forbidden histories whispered in dark corners. "Starborn," someone whispered. The word spread like wildfire. Nobles backed away instinctively. Guards gripped their weapons tighter. Even Celoria stumbled backward, her face pale with shock. Varos stared at Mira, his expression shifting from shock to cold, calculated fury. "Now you see," he said, his voice echoing through the hall. He pointed a trembling finger at Mira. "She carries a dormant bloodline. One we believed extinct. One that should be extinct." Krevnar's eyes burned gold. "What are you saying?" Varos stepped forward, his voice rising with righteous anger. "She is Starborn, the original royal line. The bloodline that could command elements, bend alphas to their will, and overthrow kingdoms." His lips curled into a sneer. The bloodline your ancestors destroyed to seize power. The hall erupted into chaos once more. Krevnar looked down at Mira, unconscious and glowing faintly in his arms. The woman he loved. The woman they'd tried to erase. Not just because she was an Omega, but because she was dangerous. To Varos. To the Council. To their lies. She isn't a threat, Krevnar said quietly, his voice somehow cutting through the noise. She's the truth you've been trying to bury. If you can't stand leaders who silence the truth and destroy those who threaten their power, subscribe now. Only the guilty stay silent. Comment truth over corruption if you refuse to let them erase history.
The silence that followed Krevnar's words was suffocating. Then Elder Varos laughed. It was a cold, brittle sound that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. He straightened his ceremonial robes, his thin lips curling into a smile that held no warmth. You still don't understand, do you, Krevnar? Varos said, his voice dripping with condescension. This was never about her being an Omega. This was never about love or tradition or any of the pretty lies we fed you. Krevnar's eyes narrowed. What are you saying? Varos gestured to the other council members, who rose from their seats in unison, their faces masks of cold calculation. We never planned for you to rule long-term, Varos said simply. You were always meant to be temporary. A placeholder until we found someone more compliant. The words hit like a physical blow. Krevnar's grip on Mira tightened instinctively. You're staging a coup. We're restoring order, Varos corrected. The throne belongs to those who understand how power truly works. Not to fools who throw away kingdoms for Omegas. He raised his hand, and from the shadows behind Lady Celoria, a figure stepped forward. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Dressed in ceremonial armor identical to Krevnar's, but polished to perfection. Lord Vaelric. Krevnar's cousin. They'd grown up together, competed for everything, strength, strategy, dominance. Vaelric had always been second best, always bitter, always watching the throne with hungry eyes. Hello, cousin, Vaelric said, his voice smooth as silk. Miss me? Krevnar's blood ran cold. You? Me, Vaelric confirmed, stepping closer. The council approached me months ago. They offered me what you so foolishly rejected, absolute power without sentiment. Without weakness. His eyes flicked to Mira with disgust. Without distractions. You were supposed to be crowned tonight, Varos continued. After Krevnar's unfortunate accident during the ceremony. He smiled. But you came back early. Inconvenient, but not insurmountable. Krevnar looked around the hall. The nobles who'd been celebrating moments ago now watched with carefully neutral expressions. They'd known. Or at least suspected. And they'd done nothing. This is treason, Krevnar growled. This is survival, Varos snapped. The Starborn line nearly destroyed this kingdom once. We exterminated them to protect our future. And now you bring one directly into the throne room? He shook his head. You've become a liability, Krevnar. One we can no longer afford. Varos nodded to the guards. 20 armored wolves, Krevnar's own palace guard, turned their blades toward their king. Not all of them. Some hesitated, torn between loyalty and fear. But enough. More than enough. Stand down, one of the guards said, his voice shaking. Your Majesty, please. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Krevnar shifted Mira's weight carefully, positioning her behind him as much as possible while still holding her. His eyes bled to pure black as his wolf surged to the surface. You want the throne? Krevnar snarled at Vaelric. Come take it. Vaelric smiled. With pleasure. The guards advanced. Krevnar prepared to fight, to die if necessary, to protect the woman in his arms. But then something changed. The air pressure dropped suddenly, violently. The candles flickered and died, plunging half the hall into shadow. A wind, impossible, indoors, ripped through the chamber, scattering banners and extinguishing more flames. The chandeliers swung wildly, chains groaning. And Mira's eyes snapped open. But they weren't brown anymore. They burned with white gold light so bright it hurt to look at directly. Her entire body radiated power, ancient, raw, elemental. The glow intensified until she was nearly impossible to see clearly, as if she were carved from lightning itself. Krevnar felt her shift in his arms, felt her stand on trembling legs, though he kept one hand on her back to steady her. When she spoke, her voice was layered, as if 1,000 generations spoke through her at once. Stop. The single word reverberated through the hall like a shockwave. Every guard froze mid-step, their blades suspended in air. Daelric's confident smirk vanished. He staggered backward, clutching his head. Varos tried to speak, but no sound came out. His mouth moved uselessly, eyes wide with terror. Even Krevnar felt the compulsion, the overwhelming urge to obey, though Mira's power didn't seem directed at him. The nobles dropped to their knees instinctively, overwhelmed by the presence of something primal, something that predated their entire civilization. The wind continued to howl through the hall, whipping Mira's torn dress around her legs. Her hair floated as if she were underwater. The white gold light pulsed with each breath she took. She turned her glowing gaze to Varos. "You tried to bury me," she said, her voice still layered with that ancient resonance. "You tried to erase my bloodline. You tried to silence the truth." Varos fell to his knees, trembling. "But the Starborn do not die quietly," Mira whispered. "We burn." The light intensified until it was blinding. And then Mira's eyes rolled back. She collapsed. Krevnar caught her instantly, lowering her gently as the light faded from her skin. But it didn't disappear completely. A faint glow still pulsed at her fingertips, at her chest, proof that whatever had awakened inside her was only beginning to stir. The hall remained frozen in stunned silence. Every guard's blade was still lowered. Every noble still knelt. And Varos stared at Mira with absolute, primal terror. Because he'd just seen his own extinction looking back at him. If you despise people who scheme and betray others for power, subscribe now. Only traitors like Daelric stay silent. Comment loyalty over betrayal if you believe family shouldn't stab each other in the back for a crown. For 3 heartbeats, nothing moved. Then Mira stirred in Krevnar's arms. Her eyes opened slowly, still glowing with that white gold light, but softer now, more controlled. She sat up, her hand braced against Krevnar's chest for support. "Mira," he whispered. "Don't push yourself." "No," she said, her voice still layered with ancient power. "They need to see." She stood, legs trembling but holding. Krevnar rose beside her, ready to catch her if she fell. Mira raised both hands, and the white gold light poured from her fingertips like water. It spread across the marble floor, flowing toward the council members who still knelt frozen in terror. The light formed a perfect circle around Varos, Daelric, and 3 other council elders who'd been part of the conspiracy. The moment it touched them, they screamed, not in pain, but in horror at what was happening. "Truth," Mira whispered. "That's all the Starborn ever demanded. Not submission. Not worship. Just truth." The circle pulsed. And the confessions began. Varos spoke first, his voice ripped from his throat against his will. "We assassinated King Theron 20 years ago. Made it look like a heart attack. He was going to expose our manipulation." Another elder, "We purged the Starborn bloodline 3 centuries ago. Hunted them across the continent. Burned their villages. Killed their children." A third, "We've been manipulating every king since. Choosing their mates. Controlling their policies. Anyone who resisted was removed. Daelric snarled, fighting against the compulsion, but the words came anyway. We plan to kill Krevnar during the coronation. Poison in his wine. Blame it on rogue assassins. Crown me within the hour. And Mira? Krevnar demanded, his voice shaking with rage. Varos's face twisted with fury as the truth poured out. I sent hunters. Ordered them to make it look like an accident. She was a threat, not just to the throne, but to everything we'd built. If anyone discovered she was Starborn, our entire legacy would crumble. The hall erupted in gasps and shouts. Nobles who'd remained neutral now looked at the council with horror and disgust. Lady Celoria stumbled forward, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know, she sobbed, falling to her knees before Krevnar. Your Majesty, I swear I didn't know about the murders, the conspiracy. I thought I was just a political match. I never wanted. Get up, Krevnar said quietly. You were a pawn. Nothing more. Celoria rose shakily, backing away from the circle of light. Daelric, still trapped within Mira's power, suddenly roared with rage. The truth had been torn from him, his plans exposed, his ambition shattered. He did the only thing left to a desperate, cornered wolf. He attacked. Daelric broke free of the circle with sheer force of will, lunging at Krevnar with claws extended and murder in his eyes. He made it 3 steps. Mira flicked her wrist. A blast of pure Starborn energy, white gold and devastating, caught Daelric in the chest and sent him flying backward. He crashed into the far wall with bone-shattering force, sliding to the ground unconscious. The hall went silent. Mira lowered her hand slowly, breathing hard. The glow around her intensified for a moment, then settled into a steady pulse. She turned to face the remaining council members. For 300 years, she said, her voice echoing with power, you've ruled through lies, manipulation, and murder. You've destroyed bloodlines. You've corrupted kings. You've silenced anyone who threatened your power. Varos tried to speak, but no words came. He simply trembled, tears of rage and terror streaming down his weathered face. Your reign, Mira said softly, is over. The council members collapsed, powerless, exposed, their corruption laid bare before the entire kingdom. And standing above them, still glowing with the power of a bloodline that refused to die, was the Omega they'd tried to erase. If you can't stand leaders who hide behind lies and destroy innocent people to keep power, subscribe now, only the corrupt won't. Comment expose them all if you believe truth should always defeat corruption. The hall remained frozen in the aftermath of Mira's power. Guards still knelt. Nobles whispered frantically. The corrupt council members lay trembling within the circle of truthlight, their secrets exposed, their power shattered. Krevnar looked at Mira, exhausted but standing, her body still glowing faintly with Starborn light, and made his decision. He swept her into his arms before she could protest. Krevnar, she started. Let me, he said softly. Just let me. He turned and walked toward the dais where the throne sat, black stone carved with ancient runes, wrapped in crimson banners, waiting for a king who'd never arrived. Until now. Every eye in the hall followed them. Krevnar climbed the steps slowly, deliberately. When he reached the top, he set Mira gently on her feet, steadying her with both hands. Then, before the entire kingdom, Alpha King Krevnar Bloodbane dropped to one knee. The gasps were immediate. Shocked. Horrified. An Alpha kneeling before an Omega shattered every tradition, every hierarchy, every law that had governed wolf society for centuries. But Krevnar didn't care. He looked up at Mira, his eyes still bleeding gold, and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. You are the strongest person I have ever known. You survived exile, assassination, and a blizzard that should have killed you. You awakened a power that terrifies those who tried to destroy you. His voice softened. And through it all, you only wanted to protect me. Tears streamed down Mira's face. I didn't know what I was, she whispered. I thought I was nobody. I thought loving you would ruin your life. I ran because I was terrified of destroying everything you'd worked for. You could never ruin me, Krevnar said fiercely. You saved me. He stood, taking her hands in his. Behind them, the throne began to glow, faint at first, then brighter, pulsing with the same white-gold light that radiated from Mira. Starborn recognition. The throne was responding to her bloodline, acknowledging what the council had tried to erase for 3 centuries. If this throne does not accept you, Krevnar declared, his voice echoing through the hall, I renounce it. I will burn it to ash before I let anyone tell me you're not worthy. The throne pulsed brighter. Then brighter still. Until the entire dais was bathed in radiant light. The message was clear, the throne didn't just accept Mira. It had been waiting for her. Krevnar turned to the crowd. Mira is my queen. My Luna. My mate. Anyone who challenges this challenges me. Silence. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a single wolf dropped to one knee. Then another. Then 10 more. Within moments, the entire hall knelt, not from compulsion, but from choice. Even Lady Celoria lowered her head in acceptance, her dreams of a crown replaced by relief that she'd escaped the conspiracy with her life. 1 week later. The coronation was held again. But this time, it was different. Varos and the corrupt council members were imprisoned in the lowest dungeons, awaiting trial for centuries of crimes. Daelric had been stripped of his title and banished to the outer territories, forbidden from ever returning to the capital. Celoria had stepped aside gracefully, accepting a position as ambassador to the southern Pax, a role that suited her political skills without the burden of a loveless match. And at the center of the hall, beneath the same chandeliers that had witnessed chaos a week earlier, stood Krevnar and Mira. He wore his armor, polished now, but still bearing the dents from his desperate search through the mountains. She wore a gown of white and gold, starborn light woven into the fabric itself, making her glow like dawn breaking over snow. The new council, wolves chosen for integrity rather than bloodline, placed twin crowns upon their heads. The first Alpha Starborn union in 300 years. As the hall erupted in celebration, Krevnar lifted Mira into his arms and turned to face the kingdom. Light poured through the stained glass windows, casting patterns of color across her face. They tried to bury us, Krevnar murmured into her hair. Mira smiled, her eyes glowing softly. They didn't know we were seeds. Outside, across the kingdom, the story was already spreading. The night the ceremony stopped. The night an Alpha King walked into his own coronation carrying the Omega his council had tried to erase. The night destiny proved stronger than corruption. The night love shattered centuries of lies. And the kingdom would never be the same. If you believe love should always defeat corruption and systems that silence the innocent, subscribe to Silver Moon Chronicles. Only people like Varos who fear the truth won't. Comment destiny over corruption if you refuse to let power-hungry leaders write history and erase the worthy.